everybody. Welcome to our Kratom Addiction and Recovery Daily Devotional series. So we've been in Ecclesiastes chapter 3 for the past week and a half, and we're discussing seasons in our lives, seasons in our addiction and recovery, and the deeper meanings and lessons that we can draw from those seasons. So today we're in verse 8, which is a time to love and a time to hate, a time of war and a time of peace. In our lives and in the world around us, there are seasons of love and there are seasons of hate. A lot of times these are outside of our control. A lot of times in our relationships, we hit conflicts and challenges. In our own lives, in our addictions, there is a time of hate that our addictions bring in. When we first start kratom, for a lot of us, it starts off as a season of love. For me, when I started taking kratom, it made me feel awesome. I thought I had found this answer to my life's problems, my challenges, and as I got into my addiction, I realized the damage that it was causing, and that was a season of hate for me. I started to hate myself. I started to hate others around me. Kratom had this weird way of making me hyper focused and critical of everyone around me, hyper paranoid about everything, about people, about places, about things. And as I look back on that time of my life, I realize how much hate that I was feeling towards myself and towards other people. I know everyone is different. Some people don't experience this with kratom or kratom addiction, but for me, that's one of the things that I experienced. So there is a season for hate. There's a season when hate is justified. There can be things that happen to us or happen in the world around us that cause injustice and pain and sadness, and so there are times when it's okay to hate things. I got to the point where I hated my kratom addiction. I hated what it had done to me. There are times for me now where I still feel hate for kratom in different ways. I understand that it's good for some people and that it helps some people, but I sometimes do find myself hating different things about it, and I'm justified in that hatred. I'm justified in, what kratom did to me and how it affected my life. I feel hatred towards the choices that I made because of my addiction. I know that I can't blame kratom completely for it because I was the one that made those choices. So there are times where we are justified in our anger. There are things that happen, abuse, neglect, trauma. It's okay to hate these things. So there are seasons of hate in our life. There are seasons of love too, which is how the verse starts out. And, love is so important. It's so important to love ourselves, to love God, to love others. And so having these seasons where we focus on that, I like to talk about the polarities and the juxtapositions of these different seasons of our lives and how they compare to one another, because it's interesting when you look at the different extremes and the differences between the seasons. Excuse me. So there is a time to love. And when we come out of our addictions, for some of us, like I was saying, and I've talked to others, that, there is a time of when we're in our addiction. Kratom does this to some of us, where it makes us hyper-focused on others, and it makes us hyper-focused on all the evil and the wrong that's going on in the world. And so then there comes a time to love. And I've been in communication in my comment section and one-on-one, and I've talked about how that's changed in me, and I actually have had the experience recently where I've talked about how I used to be focused on the hatred towards all the evil and all the wrong in the world. And I've come to a point in my life where I choose not to focus on that. And this is a season of love for me. Excuse me. So there is the season to love. And so when we look at the differences between these seasons, it's interesting to see like what we can learn from them. And for me, what I learned about myself and from that season of hate in my life is that it's easy to focus on the bad. It's easy to focus on the things that we hate about a situation, where we are in our lives, about other people. And what it does is it takes the focus off of us. And so what I've learned from that season of hate in my life was that it came time for me to focus on myself and to focus on what I was bringing to the table and the mistakes that I had made and the consequences that I had to accept for the choices and the mistakes that I had made. And so that's the deeper meaning out of that season of hate for me that I drew, that, there comes a time to shift the focus from hating, what's going on or others around us, and shifting it to, what can I do? What can I change about myself? We can't change other people. No matter how hard we try, we can't change different, things that are going on in the world around us, but what we can change is ourselves. For me, accepting that I was in my kratom addiction and that needed to change was a change that I could make in myself, and not, hyper focus on other things around me. So that was one of the deeper meanings that I drew from this. So the time to love, though, what's the deeper meaning of that? The deeper meaning for me was that, through the loss that I had, through losing close family members, and which was what led me into kratom use and finding kratom to begin with. Through loss, I've learned to love more. And I've, through the season of love that followed, this season of hate and the season of loss, because that's something as well. I hated losing the people that I lost. I loved them very dearly. But what that brought out of me, and what the deeper meaning was for me in the season of love to follow, was that I had a deepened capacity for love and for empathy. So that's something that's really cool, a season of love that can follow our time when we're in our addiction. A lot of us, our relationships, our marriages, our relationships with our family and our kids and everything like that are affected by our addiction. And there can come a season of love afterwards where we are able to focus on our relationships more and able to focus on the people that we love and express our love in different ways. I've had the blessing and the privilege to be able to get to know my husband again on a completely different level since quitting kratom and quitting weed and being completely sober. Because I was in my kratom addiction for 3 years, but I was addicted to weed for 15 years. So for a big part of me and my husband's relationship, I was, on kratom or on weed. And so the chance to get sober, the blessing and the opportunity to get sober has been this chance for us to get to know each other in a completely different way and fall in love with each other all over again in a completely different way. So this has been a really beautiful season of love for me in that sense. So there are two ways to look at the beginning of this verse, and there are definitely deeper meanings that we can draw from this. Moving on, we have a time of war and a time of peace. So as we can see in the world around us, there is war going on. The song Turn, Turn, Turn by the Byrds that was based on this Bible verse, on these many verses, 1 through 11, that came out in the 60s. that song was written during the time when the Vietnam War was going on. And like I was saying, when I started doing this series a little while ago, when we began in Ecclesiastes, that song it kind of spans generations and genres. And it's a really interesting thing when we look at, how that war was going on then. We have the war going on now. We had the wars. There's always been wars that have been going on. And so there's a season of war. There's a season of conflict in our own personal lives. Not everything is going to be perfect with everyone in relationships and in crossing paths with people around us. There's going to be a time of conflict. And so the other side of that is that there's a time of peace. And I mentioned in the beginning of this that when I was in my kratom addiction, there was something about kratom for me that made me hyper focused and hypercritical about others. And there was a lot of conflict in my life during that time. I had a lot of issues going on with my families. My marriage wasn't good. A lot of my relationships were strained, and there was a lot of conflict going on. So there's a season for that. And like I was saying before, that was the chance for me to, as the season changed into a time of peace, to look at myself and look at what I was bringing to the table in this time of conflict and the time of war that was going on in these relationships. So I think that that's something that we can all draw from, that when there's conflict in our life, it's never completely the other person's fault. So in sobriety especially, I've been able to take an inventory of myself and my relationships and see the things that I've done wrong. They do that in 12-step programs, which I've never really vibed with any of the 12-step stuff, but the steps I've read them, and I can see value in how they apply to sobriety. And so that's one of the steps, is taking a moral inventory of yourself and your relationships. And I think that is important as we're, going into a life that is sober, because, we can't have all of this conflict. We can't have this war. And there is the season of that, but then there is the season for peace. And for a lot of us, we have to be the ones to make the peace. And I've spent years in conflict with situations that I didn't think that I was at fault for. But as I took this moral inventory of myself, especially this past year, I was able to see the things that I was doing wrong. In sobriety, it's become clearer and clearer to me, and I've been able to see things from a broader perspective instead of that hyper-focused, hyper-critical perspective that I would take in my addiction. And so it's allowed me to go into the season of peace and of peacemaking. So for some of us, we're still in our addictions. For some of us, there's been a lot of damage done to our relationships, and there's a lot of conflict still going on. And so there is the season to, have that, but then there's the season to make peace with ourselves and others. That's an important fact as well, is that, we're at conflict and we're at war with ourselves when we're in addiction. We're battling the addiction. We're battling our bodies as it's needing a dose of kratom every 3 to 4 hours. So there comes a time for peace, and of making peace with ourselves and making peace with others. So I encourage you to think about this more today. This is a heavy one. Hate and war is not something that anybody, wants to talk about, and talk about how there can be good to come from it. So it's a tough one. But I encourage you to think about this, and wherever you are in your process, whatever season you're in, you could still be in active kratom addiction right now, and that's okay. I've heard from a lot of you that you're making it to these devotionals and to these videos, and you're preparing to quit. and you're still in your addiction. Some of you are not even ready to quit yet, which I completely understand too. And I've shared that I wasn't ready to quit for a good solid probably 6 months or more. I stayed in this kind of in-between phase of knowing that my addiction wasn't sustainable, but knowing that I wasn't ready to quit yet. So I get it. I get wherever you are, and you are welcome here wherever you're at in your process. And so I encourage you to think about this today. I encourage you to think about these seasons and the deeper meanings that they can have in your life. And let us know how you're doing in the comment section below. And I'll see you in tomorrow's video. Bye.